is on. Nếu chịu nhà thì đó. Nếu chịu nhà thì đó.
Hi, everyone. So today we're very honored to welcome Mr. Burrage. He's going to be talking about his new concept for a novel rotorcraft on Mars. And I think this is a particularly interesting topic, especially as we're getting closer to finally explore Mars and outer space more. And currently we've only been able to send small probes, so his idea to send a bigger infrastructure is particularly interesting. With this, I hand the floor over to you, Mr. Burrage, and thank you so much for coming today.
Well, it's an honor to be here. I'd like to set the context of this talk. As you say, Mars, but more specifically, to get a feeling for the background to what my aspirations are. It's other people's aims for the colonization of Mars. Colonization plans of people like Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, the United Arab Emirates and others, I'm sure, for something important in colonization, and that is a self-sustainable city on Mars. In other words, it can survive temporary loss or permanent loss of connections to Earth. To put a time scale on this, in about 10 years, sooner if Elon Musk's timetable that's set for SpaceX happens, in about 10 years, the first humans will land on Mars. And 26 months later, because that's when the next window occurs, another group will arrive, and so on, every 26 months. And that will continue window by window until a population for, let's call it Mars City, has reached 1 million. Just a moment, I'm having trouble with the cursor.
Yeah, it's there.
I'll get it down here. Well, if you think of the windows, I'm not saying they exactly start in 10 years, but think around about that. 4 windows later, so that's 4 increments of 26 months, you can expect 25,000 people to arrive en masse. This colonization program deals with fleets. That's what the motivation and direction that SpaceX is taking it. It may be twice that number. How do you protect everyone from inadvertent import of a virus that has slipped through screening? You're dealing with really big numbers. It's kind of a massive airline in space. The answer is that in situ on Mars, already up and running, you need the kind of vaccine development and production capabilities that Oxford University and AstraZeneca were able to deploy against COVID-19. So that's an example of a pressure on what's going on in making, going to happen to colonize Mars. Now, whether it's vaccines, rocket propellant, solar panels, raw materials for industry and habitation construction, you can't wait 26 months for them to arrive from Earth. And for certain things, you don't want to pay the price. So if that sets, I hope, a context of pressure on making things happen on Mars, particularly in getting industry moving, then I'll proceed with my talk. Okay, so this is a little bit of personal history. When the stunning news arrived that NASA was actually flying a 1.8 kilo helicopter on Mars, I was working on something different. I was working on my tilt rotor concept focused on the needs of the US Marine Corps. They're a pretty capable lot and very discerning and tough customers. They have a superb aircraft, tilt rotor aircraft, which you can see both on the deck of an aircraft carrier and folded with the wings slewed around and the blades folded, ready to go down the lifts and into the hangars under the deck. Now, there's a problem, or should I say, more of a challenge. This tilt rotor, the Osprey MV22, is a jump ahead of helicopters in terms of speed, in terms of range. And the problem that creates is that the Marines and no one else has a gunship, or for that matter, a utility helicopter that can keep up with it. And so this program, Aura, is the project that the US Marines need to support their fleet of 300 or so MV22 Ospreys. So this is what I've been working on for over 10 years. Whoops, other direction. It's basically, this is shown here as in the patent. There are two ways of going to provide what the support for the Marines Ospreys. You can go down the conventional route, in other words, the tilt rotor with the MV22, and reshape it for utility and again for a gunship role. And that's the conventional approach on the left, whereas my view is that you bring the rotors together on the over the fuselage, and because of what you're saving in the huge complexity of tilting and the like and slewing of the main wing of the MV22 stuff, you get an extra ton of payload. I mean, that's my estimate, and it's an extension of the work done by Moody, Keane, and Gallagher in assessing different configurations for tilt rotor escorts and the like. And again, I'm going the wrong way. So let's. So they'll be hearing that, hopefully. Won't they? Will they hear mine? Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. Well, this is a 10 kilogram experimental drone manually controlled from the ground. It's got full stabilization and autopilot, and what we're doing here is commissioning it. The wings have been tested in the wind tunnel at Southampton University. The stability of the full-size aircraft at the 10-ton, 8-ton kind of level has been analysed as a graduate project, a final year graduation project at the University of Liverpool, for which I'm most grateful. Its Dutch roll characteristics are likely to be slightly worse than the conventional tilt rotor, but it looks like a flying wing, and I think that saves even more weight than the other. It should be okay, and it was a delight to seeing it fly. Okay, so what about the concept for Mars? I'll leave you to read the first bits. So the approach I'm taking here is to define the requirements. I mean, we need something solid to go from and focus the concept on. So we need some requirements. And the requirements that I've chosen are defined by what field geologists will need to be productive. Now, if you imagine that industry, probably right at the beginning, is saying, well, we're out of a given mineral. We can't wait 26 months for a shipment to come from Earth. Go out and find whatever it is. So the field geologists are sent out and they need to be productive. Now, the area of Mars is equivalent to the land area, the tip of all the continents of Earth. So that's a big task. The kind of area they may go to is going to be volcanic for mineral ores, and cratered areas. There's a huge area called the Tharsis Bulge. And if you take into account one of the, Olympus Mons, that huge volcano on Mars, largest in the solar system, if you take that into account and the others, you're talking about an area of highland, and I'm talking here 6 kilometers, average kind of height, the size of Africa. So the industry is told the field geologists go out and find somewhere in the equivalent of Africa, whatever it is, copper, nickel, titanium, iron, whatever, go ahead and get it. And by the way, we need it tomorrow. So that gives you one flavor. And so what I hope is that the concept will evolve from that basic kind of atmosphere and need. One of the amazing things about Mars, which in the last couple of years, as I've tried to understand the needs that there might be, is the huge amount of work and data and mapping from a geological point of view that US Geological Survey have. and they've divided up the surface of Mars quarter by quarter, and what we're looking at here in the left-hand side, if you can see, there's this small area blown up, and the coloured bit, which is basically red is high, blue is low altitude, relative to the average altitude. We'd say sea level, but the equivalent of sea level, as it were, on Mars. And that's looking at quadrangles, is the term the geologists use. Those two quadrangles together are 300 by 600 kilometers. So in choosing a small bit of Mars, it's still pretty big. And I've highlighted in black a smaller area where there's an interesting crater that's actually got a bit of spillover of lava, I guess, of igneous material. And that's still quite big, 40 kilometers by 80 kilometers. Well, the kind of activities that are going to happen here are set out there. I'll leave you to read quickly that. Well, the crater's 20 kilometers in diameter. That's quite a tiddler for quite small for Mars. There is a flat area to the south of it, which I guess would be suitable for a base. And one of the duties early on will be to at least establish a minimal base that the field geologists can work through, and they'll make their drones work hard to survey not only the base area in case there's a better patch to work from. They've got to establish habitations. They've got to establish and get themselves working, and so you're beginning to get a feel for what a capable rotorcraft may need to do. The dark brown area is old bedrock that has been exposed by the impact, and I think, although geology is not in my knowledge, that is actually being squeezed out from the results of the impact. The light brown is similar material, but older material that's been weathered. And the weathering can be by water and certainly by the wind. The area here is the Tharsis Bulge. That's Olympus Mons. That's another prominent volcanic area. And that area in total, as I mentioned, is about the size of Africa. Where the little NASA brilliant little drone is operating on Mars right at this moment, the air, it's actually a negative altitude, and the air density there is about 18, twice that, so 0.018 kilograms per meter cubed. Now that's important. If you're going to operate in Tharsis Bulge, you've really got to have designed a rotorcraft for half that. And that is, if you're serious, that's what you've got to do. The other reality is, and the snake, the red snake up there, is a full season's worth of air density changes, exactly what Ingenuity had to experience. One of the practical things that they had to do to maintain operation in the winter at the lowest density was to speed up the rotor. And that was quite a worry for them. And they had to do a lot of experiments back on Earth, which they carried out straightforwardly and efficiently, that they could operate at, I think it was 2,800 or thereabouts RPM, to compensate for the loss in density to work with. So to summarize the requirements, I know this is very top level, but to satisfy the field geologists and let them do a decent day's work in very tough environment, there's going to be lifting a lot of things around. 2-ton loads in that very thin air at 6 kilometers seems to me a sensible capacity to go for. For example, they'll have rovers up there, and maybe some of those rovers will be larger than Perseverance, which weighs in at 1 ton. They may be heavier beasts, and certainly a lot of the equipment hopefully can be broken down to 2-ton sizes. But if they've got to do drilling, then we are talking quite heavy stuff. And a day's work output, multiple segments to and from the different sites around the volcano, the crater, or possibly to fetch people or take people or material or whatever to a neighboring site, a neighboring base, and a range of thereabouts 600 kilometers seems sensible. Well, let's go back. NASA and SpaceX in a different region, not that far from, to the west, I think, of the Tharsis Bulge, the Arcadia region. NASA and SpaceX looked at sensible places, candidate landing sites for SpaceX Starship. The distances between the first of those 6 candidate sites and the others were of the order of 140 kilometers, 350 and so on, up to 1,560 kilometers. So this is the kind of scale that we need to be thinking of. Now, in terms of the concept, so moving into a solution to the requirements, what Ingenuity proved was 2 very important things. The first, obviously and importantly, is that flight on Mars is possible for a helicopter. Number 1. The second is that all the skills of that group of people you can see there, that's the team, all the virtual engineering, CAD, simulation, control design, you name it, telemetry, the business of transferring code from JPL there in California all the way up to the rover Perseverance, and from Perseverance to little Ingenuity to tell it what the waypoints are on its next little trip. All of that as a total process, and some phenomenal testing capability, a huge vacuum chamber at another NASA site, and a playground for Perseverance. Perseverance's twin to be exercised in if you want to debug a practical issue. All those resources and the bringing them together, so the engineering project lead, etc., those NASA processes have been proven by what's happened there. So brilliant, absolutely brilliant. In looking at the design of my concept rotorcraft, there's a problem. If you stick with the blading of Ingenuity there on the left, those blades only cover 14% of the rotor disc. The rotor disc is the cross-section of the air that the rotors are pulling down. Conventional helicopters are perhaps only using 8 or 10% solidity. So it's the ratio of the blade area to the pumping area, the disc area that's being worked. If you stick with 8%, then the size of the concept rotorcraft at 8 tons, which is what I'm focusing on, goes out to 100 meters. It's 100 meters in diameter. That does not sound very manageable. It sounds a horror. Well, what you can do is increase the rotor solidity. And a turbofan illustrates what 100% solidity looks like. So you stuff the rotor disc with blades. The whole of the lifting area is as compact as you possibly can. And that brings you down to, if it's a single rotor, say something like 28 meters diameter. That to me sounds plausible as a maneuverable and useful thing. Dare I say that should be okay. So we're not going to have a single rotor or even the Ingenuity thing. I would go for a quadcopter with 100% solidity. You need separation of the rotors. You finish up not with 28 meter footprint, but a 32 meter footprint, and a structure beneath carrying the blue area, which is where everything in terms of the power plant, the driving and electrical transmission out to the motors at each of the hubs, and all the avionics and the payload. Now, an important thing about this design is that the power plant uses the same fuel as the Starships. In other words, Starship, when it lands, has to be refueled from local Mars-based propellant plant with liquid methane and liquid oxygen. So there's plenty of that fuel capacity around, and providing you can find water, and there's plenty of ice all over Mars, maybe not easy to get at sometimes, but with the carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and the water from the ice and solar power in terms of conventional voltaic solar cells, you have the makings for the propellant for Starship or the fuel for this beast here. So here what I've done is sketch my 8,000 kilogram rotorcraft concept. Now, setting aside implementation of the design, there is one huge question. How are you going to test it? How are you going to develop it? Think of all the processes that NASA went through to develop Ingenuity. How are you going to replicate that on Earth? Because you're going to need it in advance, not a decade or two after you started populating Mars. So the only answer is you need a flight testing campaign in Earth's atmosphere. So let's have a quick look at that. For this quad rotor 8-ton rotorcraft to be successful, you're going to have successful flight testing on Earth. Now, if you go high enough in the Earth's stratosphere, you can equal Mars. You're not identically with atmospheric density and not far off temperature. So Reynolds numbers for the aerodynamics of the rotorcraft will be spot on, but there is a big problem, and that is Earth's gravity. And what that is saying is, if you're going to test the rotorcraft on Earth, what you're going to do is you need to operate the rotorcraft at about 1/3 of its Mars mass, i.e. nearly empty. So we're getting by the back door another requirement, and the requirement is that the empty weight plus, let's say, half an hour's or an hour's worth of fuel must be 2.6 times less than the mass that you want on Mars. So it basically, you want an empty weight of 2.5 tons. Now, what this graph shows is how the fuel is expended in flying this rotorcraft. Think of the challenges of the control challenges and flight challenges of going all the way from 0 altitude to 34.4 kilometers high. I mean, it looks impossible. Well, if you're going to get to Mars, this is what you've got to do. You've got to do the impossible. Well, this example flight starts with an assumption of 2.5 tons empty weight, 1,200 kilograms of fuel. So that's the left-hand corner of the blue line, and 86 minutes of trial and lifting later, you have hopefully over 500 kilograms of fuel left, which should be okay for nearly 40 minutes of flight test time at the target altitude. Now, if you go down to the array of numbers there and look at the third line down, density, the row figure, kilograms per meter cubed, ISA, standard atmosphere. You can see the change in atmosphere. We start off at 1.225 kilograms per cubic meter, and progressively as we climb, we get down to the 0.009 kilograms per meter cube of Tharsis bulge. The other side of that coin is, remember how Ingenuity had to change its RPM with change of atmospheric density? Well, it really is serious here to keep things sensible, and by sensible, that's not simply Reynolds number or whatever, it's actually Mach number of the tips of the rotor blades, round about 0.7 Mach number. In order to do that, the rotor speeds and the lift, you're going to be probably driven as much by rotor density, air density. You're going to have to keep the RPM down to, well, starting with 22 RPM. How do we visualize what that means? Well, the actual pressure that each blade is experiencing as you go through those RPM and as you increase in altitude and decrease in air density is fairly easy to visualize. Imagine you're in a car, in an automobile, and you're going at about 30 miles an hour. So put your arm out of the window and feel the pressure of the air. That is the pressure that this 8-ton beast with its huge rotors, that's the pressure that the individual blades actually feel. So what about the construction of those blades? Okay, well, in the car, imagine you've got the kids in the back and they just come back from a party and they brought back balloons on string. One of them decides it would be fun to put the balloon out of the window at the back, and you in horror see in the mirror what they're up to. But being an engineer, you're delighted to see that this balloon happily keeps its shape despite moving at the equivalent of Mach 0.7 on top of the Tharsis bulge in Mars. So although these are big beasts, there's going to be some innovative engineering to hit the weight budgets. And really, we're not talking about solid blades in the conventional sense. We're talking more about, well, you know the wings of paragliders, power paragliders, or the sails of boats or whatever. We're thinking more of technology in that region. Well, in a sense, that's about it. What is next? Well, need a team and funding. So, questions?
Thank you so much for this very interesting presentation. It was really fascinating to hear more about your concept and how it fits into the current work being done in this field. So I think we have a few questions. And the first one would be, as you said, you're looking for a team and maybe some financing. Who do you hope will first give the initial funds to fund such an idea? Do you think it will come from private sector or from space agencies, like national or international space agencies?
Well, those agencies have an important part to play, because in many ways they hold tremendous technology, databases, personnel, test capabilities, and the like. What they don't possess, and the likes of Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk and others possess, is the drive to make things happen. So if my dream's to come true, I think it would be the likes of the entrepreneurs who are already seriously committed to colonization of Mars to take an interest. And the route that is taken, in a sense, would have to reflect what their interest turns out to be. They're in the driving seat.
Thank you. I think we have a question from the audience. Do you want me to read it out, or?
Paul Shearer, he's asked, what's the plan for your design in the future? Right, well, assuming the funding is there, do you remember the picture of the team that was needed for ingenuity? You imagine all the different disciplines that that team had to cover. And basically, as a starting point, you've got to be able to hit every one of those. I mean, the number of really big questions for each component in making a project like this happen, they need very serious study, and study not in isolation of virtual engineering, yes, but there's going to have to be serious experimentation at all different scales. I think looking beyond the very first kind of bringing together of teams to make an overall project team, you have to say, well, are there some milestones before you start the really serious flight testing on Earth? And yes, I think there'll be a fairly decent sized drone to test out basically the capability you might seek beyond Ingenuity on Mars. So let's say a 10 or 20 kilogram drone, possibly a quadcopter, but not necessarily. So it's simply a vehicle to get the avionics, communication, etc., out of the sun, and hopefully that will carry up to a two-man quadcopter. So, if you like, son of the MR8000, and that's a stepping stone to the full machine. There's other stepping stones on the technology that you need. Big steps and a lot of effort, to go on in parallel. We can't do it in sequence, so you need a very broad team, a very broad base, as you saw for Ingenuity.
Thank you for your answer. I think that's really interesting to hear, especially like the broad variety of people that will be needed, and hopefully it's also inspiring for the people listening in to know that there is more work they can achieve. I wanted to ask, why did you choose the concept of a helicopter or a flying object instead of a rover?
The speed at which Perseverance moves over the surface of Mars is a bit of a speed record, but it's only, I think, at maximum speed a couple of kilometers an hour. So its ability to survey large areas is very restrictive, and it's only spending perhaps 5% or 10% of its time at full speed. So the actual distance it can cover and the areas that it can survey are very, very restricted. Ingenuity can only fly for 90 seconds at a time, but the amount of area, even just going to that little helicopter, that it can cover and the viewpoints it can take away from the Perseverance rover are just fantastic. Now, the reason it can only fly for a minute or so is that it relies on batteries. In jumping up to a larger scale, capable of moving people around, you've really got to move them quickly. You've got to make a day productive. When a field geologist goes to inspect a particular stratum or outcrop of rock, in no time flat, without consulting people back on Earth, he'll know this is not the one. He'd like to go and see the one just over there, half a kilometer away. He wants to do that immediately. That's where the rotorcraft comes in. Maybe it's only the two-man rotorcraft he uses for that. And so he gets back in the rotorcraft, picks up his pickaxe or whatever he hits rocks with, and goes over there and has a quick fly around, decides where he's going to land, decide the best way of attacking that new outcrop. And that's a few minutes in the day of his life for one day. You really need the pace of rotorcraft to move you around. Okay, you could speed up a ground rover, but look at some of the rocks and gullies and the like you're going to be working in. You don't want to be held up by some darn great rock. You need to fly over it. Hence, rotorcraft.
Okay, yeah, that is a really great explanation, and it's very interesting to hear. And I also wanted to ask, do you plan to send these rotorcrafts already pre-built, or do you hope to find most of the materials needed to build them there once people are on Mars?
Well, I think that they have to be packaged so that they will fit into Starship as cargo, and assembled, hopefully as automatically as possible, perhaps with the help of assembly robots on the surface at Mars. So the answer is certainly initially it's the MR8000 rotorcraft, the smaller version, and the drones of that are simply cargo for Starship, which needs to be reassembled, like habitation and propellant plant and the like. Later on, as the city grows, yes, design your own rotorcraft on Mars. Be interesting to see what they turn out to look like.
Do you already know what kind of materials you'd like to use to build the rotorcrafts, ideally, or any more plans?
The one that I've worried about is the blades of the rotors. And if you do a weight breakdown, if you do a weight breakdown, I seem to remember that. So let's see if I've got anything here. Yeah. Okay. So this is a weight breakdown, and this is in kilogram in pounds. So plenty of room for finger trouble on metric or imperial units, English units. This would suggest a budget for the total of the blades, and if you break that down, the area you need to cover, the budget of say 200, 400 kilos comes down to nylon 6.6 hot air balloon fabric, and you're looking at there perhaps treating it very, very crudely as a single covering of a total rotor shared between the separate blades. There's 34 kilograms. Okay. Taking the analogy of the balloon, the Charles balloon being dragged along at 30 miles an hour, you might be able to get away with much thinner material, say mylar. It'll be a difficult choice, but you can see that the choice of materials for the blades is one issue. Again, for the blades, I haven't seen, and we won't know until we do experimental and analysis work, whether you can have this cascade of blades, as in a turbofan, out of relatively extremely light material. How will it behave? What is necessary? What stiffeners? What bearing masts will be needed. There's a lot to be done, but just looking quickly at the weight budget, it looks as though it might be feasible. So.
That's really interesting to hear, and yeah, I think it will be probably a difficult choice to choose right materials to make this idea happen. I think we have another question in the chat about the particular choice of infrastructure or choice of rotorcraft that we would like to send. I don't know if I should read the question out.
No, that's fine.
Okay.
Thanks for your question, Paul. The quadcopter doesn't have any distinct advantages over a tri or a hexacopter in particular. I just prefer it. I think perhaps I've got a bit of a demon in the back of my mind, and that is really, if there's a chance, I'd like in some way to fix a wing on this beast, and it would be a weird looking wing. And my instinct tells me it'll be easier to do with a quadcopter, but you look at all the eVTOL designs there are around, any of the 200, many of the 200 have winged flight transition. There's a whole lot of configurations to consider. I'll stick to my guns and say the quadcopter is a pretty good starting point.
And I think, thank you very much for this answer. So I think one last question to wrap it up, and especially since you're looking for investors, maybe to have an approximate budget that might be needed to build such a project, or?
Well, you look at the size of the Ingenuity team and you scale that up. That team, in terms of I was going to say a limited objective. I mean, it's fantastic what they've achieved, but it's a drone. You know, it's not a full-scale beast. And what they did to give a feel for costs, were there 100, maybe that many, and others involved. So that's a size of their team. Perhaps it should start something larger than that. But that team, the costs over a number of years worked out at, I think, $80 million. You're going up an order from that easily. And it's not nice to say it, but really it's a similar order of project for sensible timescales. We've got to get this thing proven, if it's going to be of use, by round about the 10-year mark from now, or if Elon achieves his 8-year kind of target, 2029 or thereabouts, my word, you're going to need a big team for a long time. It sounds more like the development of what was his first rocket, Falcon 1. You know, it's that kind of scale and a bit of a factor up from that. So you're talking a billion, 2 billion, something like that. Depends on what the customer wants, but to back off from that number and to think of the flight proving in the Earth's atmosphere, you're not going to be proving anything with just one flight. Obviously you do. You achieve a world altitude record beyond dreams if you can get it flying at 34.4 kilometers high. But it doesn't stop there. You basically need to have a small fleet of the beasts and be testing all of them in different ways, not all at 34 kilometers high, but you've actually got to work through what it's like to operate a small fleet of these rotorcraft. Expensive stuff. But if you look at the way SpaceX are tackling the development of Starship, they're not doing it in small numbers. They're doing their proof with production engineering. And the advantage of doing that is, okay, they've got a reusable design, but the advantage of working with a small fleet or a large fleet in Starship's case is you're proving production quality, and that carries through into operation. And think about it, those guys, if SpaceX are operating their fleet to Mars, they're operating an airline. It's a bit of an annoying airline, because if you miss one window, you have to wait 26 months for the next slot. But when they go into orbit, there's a few hundred of them going into orbit. Yeah, it's and they've all it's got to be as reliable and safe as going on any major airline here on Earth. It's you don't achieve that kind of reliability without an awful lot of proof and operation of the production design. So expensive.
Yeah, I guess it's going to be an interesting challenge, and hopefully this presentation and this talk will help reach awareness about this problem, and also raise interest in your great idea and concept. So I think, unfortunately, we've overrun a bit, but thank you so much for your time and your great presentation. And it was really interesting to hear your ideas.
Thank you, Mathilde. It's been a pleasure, and thank you to Jana as well for orchestrating things.